I'm Bill Tuber, Vice Chairman of EMC, and on behalf of Joe Tucci, David Goulden, and the rest of the executive team, I want to welcome everybody here tonight, EMC Women on the World. And what I understand is we didn't have records of big data back then, but this started 7 years ago. If anybody saw Joe Tucci's presentation the other day, he talked about the EMC, this conference going from 1,000 to 15,000. Well, Frank, you still here? Where are you? There he is. Frank started this 7 years ago. So, kudos to you, Frank. He said it was him and a round table of about 10 or 15 women for breakfast then. But he paid. Anyway, we got a terrific program today. This has grown from the 20 people to we had about 380 registrants today, and we're very proud of it. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Helene Barnekow, who runs our field marketing programs, and she's going to take you through what we're going to do. Thanks, and thanks for coming.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Well, first of all, I want to say wow, because this is, to me, very impressive. We are day 3 into the most exciting EMC world we've ever been to, and we've had very intense days and nights, probably, most of us. And I still see this room full with buzzing people, so it's just absolutely terrific. So in total, we have about 480 people coming to this program. So that's about a 375% increase since last year. So I'm very excited. This is a passion of mine that we actually have 29 countries represented in this room today. And since the US is a huge country, we also counted the states, and we actually have 33 states represented in here. A third objective we had for today was to expand this and say it's not obviously all about us, even if it's sometimes nice to think that. It is really about our customers and partners. And we, for the first time, have really gone much more proactively and invited them. And we have about 150 people in here from our customers and partners. Now, we have 2 objectives really with this. The first, of course, is to bring us together to network and to really start to build a community, because communities are so powerful and they will help us in so many different ways. Now, the second objective is why we're now coming to our speakers soon. And we want to give some inspiration and some insights and some clues to how we can be more influential and how we can reach even greater results in everything we do. So I'm going to bring a wonderful, inspirational woman to the stage. She is a previous journalist for Wall Street Journal, award-winning. She writes for Forbes columns. She has a blog that is followed in 28 countries, so truly international. And she is just very, very inspirational. She will share with you her own insights and tips on how we become more influential. So please, Kare Anderson, come to the stage.
It's been a real inspiration to be here, I'll say that. And what I want to share over the next few minutes is just some of the hidden behavior cues we have that can bring us closer. So it was just wonderfully delightful to see the vibrance and the connections highlighted today. But before I go further, I want to thank Sheryl Chamberlain for her magical part in helping me to understand this and bring it together and telling me about seeing the world through the lens of women and leadership, but it's about women and men. So could you please turn to the more normal of the 2 people on either side of you? And ask that person to be your partner and shake hands with them, stranger or close friend if they are. Now, you already showed yourself and how you see the world and how you present yourself. So I want to go through a series of tips in the next 20 minutes that are based on research. And growing up somewhat shy and a stutterer, it's been compelling to me to see how we bust relationships or we build them. So turn back to your partner with your best social smile and confirm that, in fact, they do want to be your partner. Now, some people sit like this thinking, get through the corny part, I hope something's worthwhile, I've got to go. Other people shook hands, and still other people try to help other people find partners. Now, there's no one right way to be, except the way I act. And we all feel that way. So I'm going to go through some of the counterintuitive ways we connect or not. It's not that I'm good at it, it's just I care a lot about it. So when you shook hands, someone initiated the contact and the other one responded. And sometimes when there's two very outgoing people, they just did it very quickly. Now, we have what's called a genial face in repose. So I'm going to go through these sort of quickly because you've already gone on one mental vacation and I'm deeply offended. But I want these to be actionable. So a genial face in repose is not the look what you just had a moment ago, that social face. It's the look you have on your way through your life. So it's the look you have, and some of us, as we get older, things tend to fall. And we tend to, in repose when we're thinking, look dour, or to use a technical term, pissed. But not all of us. Now, when I saw how drastic this research was, some people in repose actually looked different than they felt. They were thinking, they cared a lot, and other people took umbrage, and this is in one monoculture in the US. Then I thought, little things can mean a lot. Now, of course, you've already made up your mind how helpful this is going to be. Any wild guesses how long we take in the US to make a first impression? Just shout it out. What do you think? What a cynical group. Not cynical enough. 2 to 4 seconds now, it's going down. And your peripheral vision has gone down because you're staring more at the screen. And more of us in repose are looking pissed. This is good news, knowing that if you have a warm expression on your face, it's vastly helpful, not just when you put it on. So when I came home, I asked my godson, I said, I've been reading this research, and I want to ask you, what's the face I have in repose? And he says, we call you radar eyes, you lock in. I do not. So self-reflection is important. When I went to college, it was like a whole new world. I'd sit in a class of 500. I was blessed to be around all these brilliant teachers. And later on, when I was brought back to be on a committee at the college, I was so honored. But during the cocktail hour, the professor came up and he said, you know, when we first saw you, and several of us did, come over here, John, come here. He said, you know, our first thinking was, look at that person. I wonder if she's on Quaaludes. And then I thought, well, maybe you're trying to hit on us, and it's bizarre. And finally, we realized you actually may be interested in learning. So it's not your intent, it's your effect. And the muscles in your face, you can gradually change over time to look genial and repose. Could you hold up your fingers like this? Put them on top of your cheek, and do small round circles like this down the front, and then along the jawline, right under the ear. It feels really good. Now, if you do that twice, you actually loosen up and look more attractive. Richie Davidson, 4 different studies, found it made a huge difference. We project onto you that you're more caring, empathic, better looking, and smarter. That's a lot out of just changing how you look in repose. Now, I'm also going to suggest, in an increasingly complex, connected world, bad and good happens from more places faster. And the people that are going to do well are connective leaders. They're the ones who say, I see a mutual interest here. They talk sooner to the sweet spot of mutual interest. They're vividly specific. Now, most of us are smart in the room. That's unfortunate. And we care deeply about our work. That's unfortunate for one reason. The more we know about something, the more we tend to talk in generalities. The specific proves the general makes people go to sleep. And yet that's what we tend to do. So for example, I want you just to think about what matters most to you in your life. And think, what's the specific detail that proves the general conclusion? It'll take a partner and several layers to go through it. I'll get back to that later. Now, could you look down at the floor? Now listen to the sounds, ambient sound. Now notice the bright lights. Now the pattern in the floor breaks up our attention span. The fact that you sit in straight rows means you'll like me less than if it was chevron or half curve. You sit at a table, if it's oval or round, it's better than rectangular or square. Even that light ambient noise in a well-constructed hotel is a slight agitation. So I'm just going to give you a few of these as we go along. I profoundly believe that there's 3 things you need in today's world. You need, number 1, to identify specifically what your core talent is. Very specifically, and the flip side, your hot buttons or your blind spots. 3 behaviors. It's very hard because we make generalizations. Oh, they're aggressive, or they're rude, or they don't listen. But when we get specific about the actual behavior, it's like defensive driving. We can see ahead of time when it's coming, and we can make choices how we're going to act. When I saw the research about how much we react against, so you hold up your hands, put in the back of your head, triune part of the brain, that's where the primitive part is. It basically means that affects you more than this, the prefrontal cortex, ostensibly executive thinking. Something happens, unless you've had a frontal lobotomy, you'll respond sooner, longer, and more intensely to what you don't like than what you do. So there's a good chance by now I've irritated you in some way, or you found me less than authentic, or whatever the value system is. So if we were doing back to data, as Helene would say, there are 5 things I was doing that was sort of good, and then 1 thing you didn't like, and this is the graph. This is what sticks in your mind. That's why there's 3 important parts in an interaction. The first reaction, the climatic high point, but most importantly, the peak end, as it's called, peak end in psychology. That means that disproportionately you go on a 5-day vacation. The first part, the hotel wasn't working very well. A couple other things happened. But the last day, you and the kids and the family, or whoever you're with, you had a great time at the beach. Overall, that colors your impression. Think about the implications for sales, for service, for helpfulness. As you go out the door of a hotel, it's that last in that disproportionately matters the most. Now, turn back to your more or less normal partner, and in 1 sentence only, please tell them the 1 thing you vaguely remember from this flood of stuff that just hit. 1 thing, 1 sentence, go. So of course, everybody violated that rule. Well, there may have been 2%. But you see, when you get involved and connect, you get more in sync. So you're actually liking each other more because you're acting more alike. But I will suggest a phrase, go slow to go fast. In a world where we all talk fast, and I was trying to embody that because I did a flood of stuff at more or less the same speed. So you got in the flood of that, partly because my voice has a 3-sentence pattern. So because it's melodic, you happen to pull in. That's not necessarily good because you can also space out. But there's a reason I bring this up. Say less better. Get pithy. Now, the part that my mother washed out my mouth with soap for saying 3 times, it's a very painful phrase to say, but I hope it sticks in your mind too. Shut up. Shut up sooner. Shut up more. And for us as women, it's hard to do. Listen. And I was hearing something, I think it was Frank that was talking to me about in different cultures, and we need to fill in the conversation. We don't always need to fill in. So this goes to the next part. We think when we first meet people that the most important thing is how they see us. It's gut instinctual, we're taught that. But in fact, counterintuitively, that's not the most important thing. It's funny how few people get it, and Bill Clinton has famously embodied it. It's not how you feel about me that matters most for relationships, but how you feel about yourself when you're around me. So there's a quote in my current Forbes column about that. If you like the way you are when you're around me, you will project onto me the qualities that you like in other people, whether or not I actually show that I have them to an amazing degree. But if you don't like the way that you act when you're around me, you will see in me the qualities you most dislike in other people. And you will go out of your way to prove it true, and you're more likely to talk about it, and you will even sabotage projects on which we work together to your own detriment because you dislike me. That's pretty inflammatory as a concept. So going slow to go fast, it's like fishing. Until I've hooked on something that's meaningful for you, basically we're not going to connect. Now there's another part to this, and it's about the golden rule. See, the golden rule, in fact, often doesn't work sometimes. Now, I know some of you probably heard this before, but it's not to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is what we often try to do in goodwill. And Adam Grant also talks about this in Give and Take. But it's to do unto others as they would have done unto them. It takes a lot of observation to give to people, to support them, to recognize them the way they want to be, not the way we want it. And a good connective leader is looking for the ways that that person feels honored and respected, and it brings out their best talent more. And the best thing is to have best talents used together more often. That's the key to top talent and keeping it. So if that's so, then what are the things we can do? Here's another counterintuitive truth. We think that we're showing respect by asking questions. Now, this is a hot button of mine, and I don't deal with it very well yet. Even recognize it. I'm not defensive driving seeing it. It's when someone asks you a question, and then they immediately revert it back to them and start talking about themselves. How many of you have been in that experience before? But the powerful thing is to ask a follow-up question, not as it relates to your interest, but as to what it seemed to matter most to them. Because you're digging deeper to find the hook that matters most to start the connection. Now here's the thing that stayed in my mind for a long time. This was a study done 9 years ago, and another gentleman in Wisconsin brought together a cross-functional group with 3 women, and they actually remodeled it. But here's the bottom line. We are far more revealing by the questions we ask than the answers we give. Now, taking it further, there's an extraordinary way you can bond with people. So, for example, if someone asks me a question and I answer it briefly so they want to know more, then they're more likely to ask a follow-up question to learn more. I again am genial and answer briefly. But when they ask the third question, we've dug deeper to find out the pattern of what most interests them. Could you please go like this, please? Think of all the things you can show people, and you said you came. You'll never come to one of these. These are the things that you're most angry about. You feel inept, you're irritated, you're embarrassed. This is what you love. People love this about you. It's your main talent. So the funny thing happens in the rule of 3 about listening so people ask follow-up questions. That third question is getting much closer to the heart of what's really on their mind, one way or the other, because that's the way we're wired, as we have scales in our hand to figure out what we do. So if that's true, part of the way we connect with people is to understand them sometimes more deeply than they understand themselves. Now, enough of this serious sort of stuff. I'm going to do a change. We're talking about quotability. Why do people sometimes remember what you say and other times that they don't? Well, this is sort of an odd thing to do, but I want to pick someone who's rather reserved, and I hope you don't mind. Could you please stand up and rub my shoes and show them, Bill? Just describe my shoes to the other people here.
Your shoes.
He's not rubbing them, Gail.
Your shoes are rather sensible. They have a bit of an
Yes?
Italian look with the front.
Oh,
And
that's good.
I think they're complementary, and
That's very good.
they're, you know, I think they're nice shoes.
Nice shoes. Thank you very much. Will you give him a hand for being put on the spot so well? So think about 2 weeks from now. We'll call this the Bill effect. I want to tell you where I got these shoes, and then we're going to go back to that effect. How many of you like to shop? Please look around and see who raises a hand and who doesn't. How many of you don't? So when I was in Thailand, I found that you can buy custom-made shoes that were luscious, sensible, and elegant, and they were only $28 a pair 3 years ago. So I thought, wow, canary yellow, raspberry, azure blue. I bought 13 pairs. Beautiful, elegant, and comfortable. They finally wore out, so I'm stuck back with these. And what was so nice is you could go away, come back, and they're done. Now, I know many of you have already done that sort of thing. But here's the punchline. There ain't none. This is a true story. It's boring. There's no twist. There's no inherent lesson. And it's stuck in your mind for at least 5 years. So how did Bill describe the shoes? Just raise your hand or yell out something. Okay, where did I buy the shoes? How much did they cost? How many? I hear a lot of women's voices. What were some of the colors? Now imagine if you can make a story that may be true and boring and not relevant to, well, not completely relevant to your life. Then why can't we get specific sooner and tell this detail that proves a general conclusion? And millions of dollars are spent in advertising where it still doesn't do that. So always start with the detail. Increasingly in our culture, if I ask you a question or someone else does, you want to give background first, qualifiers. In other words, bore them. But it's our growing instinct. So it's profoundly interesting to stand up and start with a question or detail that pulls people in. So there's a client of mine that was speaking at an investors conference 2 years ago. And at this investors conference in healthcare, most everybody was wearing black, talking twice as fast as me. They only had 20 minutes, and they had to present in language that was medical and healthcare and financial. And they were really down to business. I remember walking down the hallway, and two people actually literally grabbed my arm and pulled me over to the wall. One was a woman, one was a man. I mean, these were very assertive people. So when this gentleman walked on stage, he didn't walk as fast. He looked around at people, which took up time, and then he rolled back his suit sleeve, and then he rolled back his shirt sleeve, and he said, "See this patch? When this patch goes on the market in April, people who use it will feel the effects go out throughout their whole body faster than a Porsche can go from 0 to 90. So his body was a moving billboard emblematic of his message. He started with a specific, he did a compared to what, and he was the most quoted person that day when his news was not the biggest story. So we crave not necessarily stories, but vignettes. And that's what we're looking for next. Could you please just one more time turn to your partner and try one sentence and say one thing that you remember since you last talked. Go. So of course I knew it wasn't going to be one sentence. It's convivial. It's a wonderful energy. I just suggest to you, we all have many facets to our character. Wonderful book called Multiplicity. It's a shame to go through life and only show one facet a lot. There's many facets of you. And using the right ones to connect with someone else is an extraordinary way to be connective in a genuine way. And the higher the tech, the higher the need for touch, in person, connecting. And I had several wonderful experiences just tonight, the way people were doing it. And it's deeply moving to me personally that that still happens. Deeply moving. And from the things that you talked about, it's like being the best we can be and encouraging and supporting each other specifically about it. Being warm enough with each other to say, may I give you some feedback about that? Do tell me. Now, one of the phrases that I recall from my early attempts at the research was this: don't let somebody else determine your behavior. One of the saddest things in life is to see someone act like a jerk and you go out of their way to act like one too. And it's an instinctual thing that we do. So when we know our hot buttons, in the face of rancor is the moment when it's most important that we're genial and gracious back. Besides, I believe in revenge. And revenge is a sharp contrast between that person acting that way and you're acting this way. It is a great opportunity. In advertising, they call it product comparison. So it's one of the most delicious opportunities that we have. So I'm going to just close with one of my favorite quotes, because I haven't had those moments of inspiration that come out of nowhere very often. But the last job I had for the Wall Street Journal, I was interviewing some futurists, and I came down these marble steps, and it just came into my mind. So at this quote, I'm going to ask Helene to come up, and she's going to talk about some of the questions that we've gotten, and we're going to answer, and we got to be in conversation. So this is the quote. In a civilization, when love is gone, we turn to justice. And when justice is gone, we turn to power. And when power is gone, we turn to violence. And violence isn't just a drone attack or shooting someone and the horrific things we're doing. Violence is walking by somebody and not giving them the time of day. And one of the things I really loved seeing at this conference was the warmth and the way people stopped and they gave each other that attention. And that's probably one of the highest compliments I can give an organization, to see that's a part of your culture. So thank you for taking this time, and now we're going to do some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kare. That was wonderful. One of the things that we've been able to enjoy that you haven't been able to enjoy are all the tweets coming up here, because there's some fascinating tweets there that I'm sure you'd like to see later on.
Paolo.
So we're going to do a couple of the questions from the tweets, and then we're going to invite you all to participate. I cannot resist to pick the first one being a question, which I think comes from some of our friends in Latin America, like, how come we're having all these women in a conference room called Casanova?
Well, I'm sure he had many traits that pull us all together to feel closer. Is that diplomatic? Why didn't we change rooms?
Yeah. Well, if we continue with plus 370% for next year, we needed bigger rooms. So maybe we can, maybe we graduate something else. There is also a lot of comments coming up here on visibility, on creating visibility for myself.
I believe the best way to be visible, unless you want to appear narcissistic, and I'm sure none of you actually are, is to shine a bright spotlight on the specific actions of others that most embody what you want to stand for and reflect in your culture. And if you praise other people in front of those people, it's building your stature. It's proving that you notice. It's a shame we don't get specific and vivid when we do it, but that's one way. And also to have visibility outside your domains of your profession or your organization. To find others and be a pattern seeker and say, I see patterns between what we're doing at EMC or some of the customers here. I see patterns. I see this opportunity. What do you think? Those are two ideas.
Thank you. Very specific, Karen. We have a question which I can completely sympathize with. What about being short? Is that... That's why we all have high heels, right? Is that a disadvantage for women in business?
It's a disadvantage for people in business, ironically. The shorter you are, literally the more often you're overlooked. And I will say this carefully, especially if you're non-white, and there's certain things that you can do. One of them is if you're at a meeting, you can stand up to get a cup of coffee or water on the edge of it and walk over and make your comment, because this is called an angle of dominance. So unfortunately, I'm not much taller, but the angle we have here sitting down is a much stronger angle than here. So you might turn to face somebody specifically or the room, and also giving a steady glance so that you're not just scanning quickly. Shorter people disproportionately tend to look down more, and the goal is to look directly at people.
So we do need to buy high-heeled shoes, right? Another thing, and I think you touched upon this, but what about allies? How do we build allies, and how important is that to us?
How many believe in deep allies that you can trust to have your back and you learn from? So I think that's a deep part of it. Is there reciprocity? Is it helpful reciprocity? Some helpful people are actually dangerous because they're inept, am I right? So the goal is having allies that are extremely different than you around sweet spots of shared interest where they're explicit, especially in a world that's increasingly complex, especially in your organization, it's so helpful. So doing that is proving that you honor the best in them, specifically to the people important to them. You learn a lot about them. And I don't think it's a quid pro quo, but over time, there is a reciprocity back there. And when you reach out 3 steps away and point them out or cite them in a situation, often they'll hear about it. And sometimes they don't reciprocate over time, and that may not be what you want to do. But I really believe that's a good part of it. And several of the presentations I've heard in the last few days, they did that very explicitly, making the customer the superhero, but getting very concrete about it. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
How important is dress?
Dress is really important, as you might imagine, but not always in the way we imagine. So they say dress appropriately for the occasion. You may dress radically different, and then it's a problem. But so I'm going to get very specific on some things, like you're wearing a shirt where the throat shows. If your throat shows, people tend to like you more and think you're more caring, especially when it's in contrast to your skin. If you wear up patterns on the upper half of your body, people tend to not be able to focus as well. And so dress, for some people who are lean and angular, having some flow to their garments is important, because lean and angular, for some people, subconsciously means more tough. So those are just a few of the unexpected parts. But obviously, we want to be respectful to the people around and dress in accordance with what they would consider being respectful in their presence.
How do you work with a political sabotager?
I'm going to answer specifically. I actually wrote a course years ago called Dealing with Difficult People. And it was their best-selling course, and it wasn't that well written because it's that big a hot button. But I'm going to just say very carefully and quickly. When people come up during the break when it was being taught, they'd be taught specific actionable cues. The people come up and say, you know, I have this jerk, you just reminded me what you're talking about. He or she did the. Well, in light of that, which of these do you want to try on? Oh, they're just a jerk. Let me tell you a bit more. We're so wound up in what they do that actually takes a lot of time to get concrete about the specific behavior. What is the specific kind of political espionage that they do? What is the stuff that's destructive? Because only then can we make a decision. And there's a two-part decision. Sometimes they're going to do behavior that, in fact, in the larger context, we can get around, we don't even want to acknowledge. Other times, it's back to negotiations and the bigger pie thing. If someone is causing me problems, I want to make the pie bigger, and I can't wait till that point to do it. I've got to call in other support, not even maybe directly, but say, could you help me on this project? Could you help me in this? May I ask your perspective? So you build allies around it that cause them to back off out of fear or smartness. So that's a brief way to say it. It is the hottest topic in the workplace today when you actually interview people, that there's one difficult person that we disproportionately pay attention to. Not here, of course.
Of course not. Here, there's a question coming up here on physical touch beyond the handshake. Can you tell us what other physical touches would be to recommend?
Cross-culture, it's so radically different, but it felt good. We were talking about this in the back, too. Some people are inveterate huggers. When they hug everybody, that makes me uncomfortable, and it does across cultures. But when there's warmth, it's usually when it's across sex and whatever, it's the back of the arm, it's here, it's safe places, and people get convivial, and their heartbeat, eye pupil dilation, skin temperature gets more in sync. They literally get in sync with each other, which is the way all high-performing teams do. So I think it's a shame when organizations have no physical warmth. But it's sort of like that Supreme Court justice who talked about pornography. You know when it's not right, when the text feels insincere or inappropriate. But I really like seeing a lot of it here. And so remember, the back part here and the shaking hands and the upper back part, that's fairly safe for most cultures and people. But I would certainly observe what other people are doing before overstepping. This is an area where there has not been good research. So there's only sketchy research on it.
Kare, when you spoke about revenge,
do you like the way she says that? Says that, revenge, yes.
Can you give us a concrete example of an interaction where, by behaving differently or in an unexpected way, you can feel the satisfaction, right, and sort of rescue the interaction.
It's one of my favorite things I'm still working on. What can you do that makes you have a sense of revenge? I think when people are out to get you, or it appears that they are, look to their positive intent, especially when they appear to have none. Act like they mean well. When they say a denigrating thing, laugh and say, well, who knows where all these ideas come from? But you can do your own way of acting completely at ease with yourself. I used to go outside the room and kick the wall because I was upset, but in the room, practicing it, it became more second nature. So one of the best ways of revenge is to look comfortable with yourself in the moment and to respond positively to them. That leaves you room to escalate. When we react, we basically said, you're going to determine how I behave. And that is the opposite of revenge in my mind.
So, you know, you speak about the way that you present yourself when you're a short person. But when you're a tall person and you happen to be taller than the executive that you're presenting to, how do you present yourself so that way they're not looking up to you and saying, oh my God, you're huge? How do you combat that?
It of course depends on the situation, because there's a lot of short people who are completely comfortable with themselves and have gotten over that. But as you might imagine, it's the converse. Sitting for meetings makes a big difference. And you might say, could you point that out? Could you describe it? So they're standing. Again, there's only been a minimal amount of research on short, tall. And most of the research, I think, is faulty in its design. So I don't want to cite more because I don't actually trust it. That's the most I can say. What I will say is, you know, that stride, the sense of confidence when people are striding and there's not much extra movement, and the ease with which they sit down without extra motions, those are projections of gravitas, that we're at ease with ourselves. There's not a lot of fussing around. So for all people, but especially for people who don't get the clout in the room they want, that minimal, deliberate, at ease behavior, fewer gestures, lower, slower, and less, are cross-culturally one way that we look much more comfortable with ourselves. I want to thank you very much for taking the time for this. I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to thank you.
Kare, thank you so much. That was that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And I wanted to share with you that Kare has actually spent all week with us since Sunday. Yeah. She's listening to almost all our keynotes, which is impressive. And she's been lunching with a number of women from different countries, customers, partners, and she's really enjoyed it. So I think when you talk about our culture and the warmth and all of it, you've really seen it close up this week, and it's that's fabulous. So thank you so much for taking your time. Unfortunately, Kare is going to have to leave and fly back, so we're going to miss her for the rest of the drinks, I think. But I wanted to do a couple of more thank yous. So I want to extend a special thank you to Bill and to the executive team for all the support and for sponsoring this. There's obviously a lot of priorities in the company, and you're making this a priority, which is enabling all of this to happen. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Secondly, I want to thank a few people who are behind this, and some of them are actually not here, but we have also co-sponsoring and sharing budgets and all of that we are great at EMC. So I wanted to especially call out Fidel Maruso, Barbara Bidu, Linda Conley, Emil Krakauer, and Dan Campbell, who have all been really part of this and helped and sponsored in all of it. And last but not least, a lot of people, of course, to make it happen in the events team. Stacey, who's behind the women's leadership team in Hopkinton. Sheryl Chamberlain, who spares no passion on this question, always. Leah Filipkovsky, who is, among many things, my assistant, raised her hand and said, "Oh, I'll arrange this event and I'll organize this." I think she had no idea what she was getting herself into, but that's the way to do things. She's done a great job. So with that, thank you so much. And I wanted to say, this is clearly not the end. I started by saying we really want to build a community of this. So we should see this as the beginning of something. And one of the things we want to do is to create an ebook, hopefully targeting sometime in June, which will be available on iTunes and Amazon and many places. And we have some great quotes from our own execs. We have content coming from this, and I look forward to sharing that with you. And of course, we'll get online, we'll be active there, and next year, in true EMC passion and spirit, we'll do it better and bigger again. So my only message to that, enjoy Bruno Mars, enjoy the drinks, and stay connected. Thank you.
Very well done, very well.